about the question of why to have random subcells only. So there were a lot of people. So we had around, I think, around 30 or 25 or 30 participants, people from all over India. And we discussed something about the on Hyderabad Bird Atlas. There were people from Delhi who wanted to have something of Delhi Bird Atlas and how to go about it. So one of the suggestion was, because they don't have much of time and Delhi government wanted something by next February. So one suggestion was to mix eBird data, the already existing data, with the field data. So they wanted to have this grids laid out on Delhi map and the randomly selected subcells and see which subcells already have enough number of checklists. And then those subcells which do not have any checklist, they wanted to divert their efforts in surveying those regions. So I said, certainly that can be one thing. But among the lists that are already available, we have to see how much can we trust that data in terms of efforts, in terms of number of observers. Then there was a student from West Bengal. He was asking like if how can he contribute to a bird atlas of his state. So one of the things we discussed was that for many of the states and districts, the first step should be popularizing the idea of bird watching, because a lot of people do not even know that this is something as a hobby that people can take up, or something they can do. So I doing some sort of outreach activities in schools and colleges, I popularizing the idea of bird watching, and then organizing some bird walks, and maybe taking up a city-wise bird atlas before moving on to a state-wise or district-wise bird atlases. Then there was a person from Himachal Pradesh who mentioned that a lot of districts are very, very poorly, they're very undersurveyed. So one of the reasons was, which I felt could be the topography of the region and inaccessibility of the region. And I mentioned the example of our, southern Kerala, the southern Western Ghats, where a small section was uncovered during the Kerala Bird Atlas. So this is something that is not in our hand, but in those cases, when we are doing some bird checklists, we shift our selected subcells to the nearest accessible areas. So that was it.
So any inputs on methodology? I know that this is the first room, so many people just jumped into the first room. So there was a lot of discussion, may not be completely around methodology. Were there any specific comments on the methodology? There were questions like, why was line transact not followed, and those kind of things. Was there a discussion on that? Why
no.
was
So
not?
what I felt was most of the participants, they wanted to know they wanted to know more about bird atlases in general. They are bird enthusiasts and they do not have much information on this, so they wanted to learn a bit about it. So I started from the very scratch of what bird atlases are and how we did this Kerala Bird Atlas and what was the design and methodology part. Sriram was mentioning, because when I mentioned about this Delhi Bird Atlas and that you lay down your grid using the grid generator, and if there is a randomly selected subcell, but if there are no checklists from there, and if there are enough number of checklists from just the adjacent one, so I mentioned that we should not select, we should not pre-select our subcell. So Sriram was asking that why should this be? And it was that time that the Zoom thing, we came onto this.
You can explain that also. You can explain that also, and then we can go to the next one. Yeah.
So my understanding is that that's from the statistics point of view. When you're comparing the data across the landscape, you want to ensure that the data generated is random and it's not driven by something like that's whole boils down to the difference between general e-birding and our bird atlases. So in general e-birding, you select whichever place you want to be, but that's not how we want the bird atlases. Praveen, if you can add more into this.
Yeah, so if you want to compare data from one time to another time, or one place to another time, another place, you actually want an equal representation of the landscape which you are going to cover. If you do not do randomization, you will always go and do activity in bird-rich areas. And then later, when you're comparing with another year, you will not be able to compare apple to apple. In that sense, if you do a randomization, the substance will be spread across all different kinds of habitat, and that particular data will be a true representation of avifauna of that region, not overrepresented, not underrepresented. So that's exactly the reason why randomization is done on top of it. And why we do randomization, of course, is that we cannot cover everything. It's a small city, you can cover everything, but in a large area, you need to actually sample somewhere, and that has to be randomized. So I think without taking much time, Ashish, I'll go to Pooja. Pooja, why don't you summarize points to discuss?
Yes. So we mainly spoke about interactions with volunteers and mobilizing them to participate and to cover the surveys in the atlas. And I think some of the great points that were raised by few other teams was that they, before the atlas project started, they had some or other sort of regular activity which was happening in that city or the state. For example, in Mysore they were doing Asian waterfall census, which was kind of people were aware of it and they would participate regularly. Or even Kerala Bird Atlas team, they mentioned about Vembanad Lake, where they would do annual bird surveys. So people were aware of it, and through such um, events which had happened in the past, they had somewhat already good team of participants who could initiate, and I think that has played role in the extent to which the surveys can go in a season. And some challenges that we thought of was there was some discrepancies in seasonal participation. For example, participation of volunteers in wet season versus in dry season. Or another thing we had discussed about certain parts of the city or the atlas which don't get surveyed that often, or they are not thought as priority for majority of the participants. So in that case, the core team has to take a lead, or has taken a lead in other cases also, and meet the targets for a particular season. And another good points raised by many of us were that regular meetings and a constant engagement with participants might be or that seems to have some good impact on continuing the project over long term and in different situations. um, so yeah, these were the main points I would say. And yes, people also have used social media like Facebook as notice board, where they kept updating the grids to be surveyed or grids that were covered. And so yeah, there is people have worked with smaller teams and larger teams also. And but the key point seems to be, at least from my assessment of our discussion, is that regular meetings, constant engagement with the participants, and so basically communication can lead to constant participation. Yeah, thank you.
I don't know whether this was discussed also. The events, the festival-based events, Bihu BirdCon, Pongal BirdCon, Onam BirdCon, and all build the capacity to actually do a bird atlas.
Yes.
In Kerala also there are multiple districts which tried a proto atlas during GBPC. So doing the same atlas at a much smaller scale, just to try how it works out. So again, these events could be used as some carrier for the larger bird atlas.
Right.
Okay, Suryo, over to you for the public engagement.
Sure. We started with what kind of media, that is both mass media and social media, has been used by people who have already done atlases. And the consensus was that for coordination and outreach, social media in the form of WhatsApp and Facebook were the best options. And mass media was used only for post-event for publishing results. And yeah, so mainly even in Coimbatore or in Mysore, mainly WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups like the Mysore Nature Group were used primarily for social for outreach. The main reason why mass media was not used for outreach is because in case of Mysore, for example, Tanuja said that it is open to general public and they wanted some level of specialization or experience in bird identification, and there was a risk of amateurs joining the project. So to avoid that, they did not go for mass media engagement for their particular atlas. And also there is a risk of wrong information getting published if it is not checked properly in the media outlets. That is why mainly the social media groups were used by many of the most of the atlases. Some of the opportunities that we thought of were having other social media outlets, like having a hashtag in Twitter, or having targeted ads in social media, or even encouraging people to tell their personal stories after participating in atlases, to encourage more birders to join. One more point that we discussed was the inclusion of celebrities in the outreach programs, and many of the people felt that instead of just going for any of the well-known names in their locality, it is more important to go to someone who has influence but is also a bird watcher or interested in bird watching hobbies, to encourage more people and people to take up bird watching and join the Atlas initiative. So, for example, that could be anyone from some experienced bird watchers in the area to teachers in schools, or even youngsters or elderly people in the neighborhood who have some sort of influence to encourage more people to join. So I think I have covered most of the points, but if anyone wants to add to that, it would be yeah.
Yeah, we have 1 minute. If there is one question, we can take. Otherwise, we'll move to the next speaker.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Why did you choose square or rectangular grids rather than a more, actional grid which could fit onto the surface of, it can take into account the curvature of Earth?
I don't remember, honestly. It never occurred. It's a point to discuss probably. Paul. Yeah. Okay, next, Pankaj.
Yes. So our topic was project execution, funding, and contingencies and mitigation. So we started with this one question, whether the funding is really required for such a project. And there were some heads for which people suggested that funding was required. So these heads basically are travel allowances, especially for the volunteers to move in, like across the city or across the region where the atlas is to be conducted. So we all know that fuel prices have increased, and travel allowance might be something that will come handy. Second head for which funding might be required was coming out to be the space where the discussions may happen or the meetings might happen. And so that brought up the topic of institutional infrastructure needed for conducting such a project. So that's, these are some of the areas where everyone thought that there might be some support needed as such. There was another discussion point about incentives for the volunteers, and this was pretty debated, but there was a complete no to the honorarium provided to the volunteers, but incentives in other forms such as certificates or ID cards, or maybe some sort of guidance or mentoring from expert birders could be the kind of incentives that could be provided to the volunteers, and everyone almost agreed upon this particular suggestion. So to make the project more and more sustainable, a couple of bird atlases, they mentioned that they had approached to the funding agencies and they had partially got funded, especially in the early years of their project. But this was a limited funding, especially for the travel and logistics. So, I would rather say that this could be, perhaps we could, look into such kind of collaborations where more and more funding agencies or corporates, might get involved in a citizen science project, which could really be a win-win situation for both the project managers as well as, for the corporates. Finally, we discussed about, are there any risks, anything, that the project basically covers, in terms of, let's say, an insurance or something like that. So none of the projects have really, looked into it, but they do take an undertaking from the volunteers. And so that is a common practice that I have found across the atlases. So 9 members joined this discussion, and all of them represented different atlases, Mysore, Kerala, and Coimbatore. And we had a very nice discussion about the funding requirement as such. And I think all of us have agreed upon that some sort of funding might be required, but this is primarily a voluntary based project. So funding is not really a must to have a thing, but if it is there, then why not? So, that is the basically concluding remarks from the discussion.
Got it. Anything discussed on the stakeholder engagement also for creating these kind of funding opportunities, or getting in large organization like forest department into it, so that it is not an exact funding, right? It's not somebody giving you money.
Yeah,
it's somebody giving you resources.
right. So Kerala Bird Atlas had some, that way had some funding from the Kerala Forest Department, because this activity started, in collaboration with them. But I see other city atlases are not really, like working hand in hand with the government authorities. So I think that's where we all lack, some resources. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, funding may not come only in the monetary forms. It could be resources, it could be infrastructure. So yeah, I mean, that's one point that we discussed.
Okay. Any questions for Pankaj? We can take 2 questions. No, then over to you, Abinand, for the tech for Atlas.
Thanks, Praveen. We had a small group of people, around 10, 12 of us, a mix of people who participate in atlases and who hope to conduct atlases and just starting to set out. We had a brief discussion. Generally, I sort of asked them if they've used the tech, and recommendations they had on further tech to be developed, or things that they might find useful as well. A large part of the discussion, I think, which I can summarize as is given that a lot of the atlases have been conducted in Kerala and Coimbatore, Pune. As you go further, I think we had someone mention that they were planning to do an atlas in Uttarakhand. Some other limitations in places like Delhi, where you can't, given that funding comes from a certain body, you don't want to cover certain areas. To improve on our tools for creating the sampling strategies, automating some site selections in case places are inaccessible, given that you have limited tools and you don't want to have people going to an area that's extremely steep and you find another replacement and realizing that's steep as well. Are there ways to automate those? So that was a large part of the discussion. Apart from that, I reached out to some of the other people who developed some tech in the group to ask them if there were other techs that they felt there was a need to develop, but we just didn't have the expertise, because a lot of the people that are developing these tools are just enthusiasts, sort of stretching their skills and learning stuff. And we had some recommendations on some tools to plot tracks of how birders have moved to make sure that they fall strictly inside grids, to see if eBird APIs could be extended to automate some of the Atlas dashboard functionality. And that was about it. Most people were sort of there to see what tools have been used, and there were interest for an Atlas from West Bengal, from Orissa, and Delhi, and Gujarat and Kutch, and some of them had other interesting challenges of different methodologies that I think is better suited for another for a longer discussion later. Apart from that, I feel like my own thing is I would recommend everyone to continue using this tech, identify other holes. We sort of all of these have happened as and when the need arose. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to streamline this. Oh, I forgot to mention, there was another comment on a lot of them being posted on like Shiny apps or in different places, which aren't really under our control, and to make sure that some of these things last long, and maybe we can invest in our own servers and deploy them. So it's, I mean, in terms of security or longevity, that we have some more control on. But yeah, going back to what I was initially saying, I think it's, I would urge people who've done the atlases to maybe think of other tools that can be developed. People who are using them people who are starting out to use the tools, see if you have other alternatives. And even if so, try and use the ones that are already developed to find out other challenges or places that things can be streamlined and made better.
Thanks, Abinand. Was there any discussion around tight integration with eBird? Because there are some countries who has got a tight integration with eBird for their atlases. So the grids themselves come inside eBird, and the protocols are also specific protocols which you can select in eBird. Was there a discussion around that area?
No, I wasn't aware of this, but seems like an interesting thing to talk about, especially given the interest from so many people to do atlases. Maybe it's something that we could.
Yeah, got it. So thanks, Abinand. So overall, friends, like this particular session is not the end of it. It's the starting of it. So you know that there are people who have thought through some of these things. They tried a few things. So you have the people who are going to start there. You know now whom to approach for this kind of things. So it's not just one or two people in the country, but we're talking about few tens of people who has got this knowledge, whom you can approach when you start an atlas or when you restart an atlas. So this is just to start for it, and you have a forum right now to start communicating, and then we could together see what are the things which we need to develop in all fronts: technology, funding, volunteer engagement, you name it. All fronts, we will probably need more things to be developed if you want to have more such atlases being those visions which you have for yourselves getting fruitful in the way you want. So please use this network and let this be a starting for many more further atlases. So with that, I would like to thank you all for joining the morning as well as afternoon session. It's extremely fruitful. Preeti, you want to mention anything? We have 1 more minute before we hand over to you.
Before you hand over to me, so we'll give others a chance to talk before I take over.
Sure. Anybody else you want to make a parting remarks?
Yeah. Hello, Praveen. Am I audible?
Yeah.
It was very nice. I have heard all the presentation. I am Deepak Sinha from Tripura. Actually, we have a very small community of bird watchers here. We have started using the eBird very recently, and I believe it's a very good opportunity for us to learn from other bird atlases, so that we can plan about it. And I was listening to Ashish. Ashish has given a very good suggestion that we can start from a small scale, say like we can take up a city or a district and then scale up to the state level, because for us it is still in a nascent state. This time in GBBC we had a very good participation, but still we have to reach out to a lot many districts, and lot more volunteers are required. I believe for this a lot of volunteers are required, as I could understand from this discussion. And volunteers means volunteers with all sorts of this thing. But these days one thing is very easy for us is that with the eBird, it has become so easy for everyone to record bird. But only thing we require is the binocular. So I've learned a lot from this session. Thank you very much for this session. That's what I want to say.
Happy to know that. Okay, Preeti, you want to take over?
Right, sure. Thanks, Praveen. Thank you all for being there and participating in the discussions, being there since morning, and also to the moderators for moderating the session. It would be very nice. Please make a summary of 5 points that have emerged out of the discussion today, and we'll post them on Discord. If you are all on Discord already, maybe you can post it on the channel that is meant for this session. at the end, so that people who couldn't make it to the discussion get a gist of what happened, and can comment and the conversation can go forward. We now break for the poster session. We again have some really nice, about 12 to 15 posters that our presenters have made, and these posters are already up on the on Discord. So please go and browse through them and comment on them. It would be very encouraging. We have a diversity of participation even in posters, so that has been great. We have we have geographical diversity, we have diversity in topics, some community engagement related posters as well today. And one last thing, we will meet again for the closing session. This will be live streamed on YouTube at 4:15, I think. Yeah, we have 1 hour for posters, and 4:15 we'll meet again. The link to this live stream will be posted again in the Lounge channel. I will post an announcement in the announcements channel. So thank you everybody for being there, and we'll see you on Discord. Let's stay connected. So one of the other things which will also be sort of announced in the closing ceremony is also that this forum will remain open for all of us to interact. So do stay connected to each other and to everyone else who can come on board. For whoever's interested in monitoring is welcome to join this server. Just drop us an email and we will have them come. One small thing is also that Suhail has posted a link to the feedback form for the symposium in the announcements channel. So please do take 2-3 minutes to fill out this feedback form during the next session. It would be incredibly useful. It will also give us an idea for how to plan the next symposium, what changes we need to make, or whether we need such a thing at all. So yeah, that's all from my side, Ravi.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we will close the session.
Thank you.